Now for more, we're joined by Matteo Marchisio live from Beijing. He's the country director for China and Mongolia for the International Fund for Agricultural Development. So Matteo, what key policies are in place to reduce poverty in China and how have they worked so far?
Well, first of all, good evening. Poverty reduction in China is the result of a number of policies and measures that complemented over the past 40 years. But if I have to name, or if I have to identify the most important, I would name four. First, the setup of an institutional mechanism, an interministerial office that reports directly to the State Council and is in charge of overseeing and coordinate poverty reduction efforts in the country. Second, a strong fiscal support. I heard earlier, and this is true, that the government of China allocated 200 billion yuan, about 30 billion US dollars for poverty reduction in 2017, and it has increased to about 300 billion yuan, about 50 billion US dollars for poverty reduction in 2018. Third, precise targeting and tailored measure for poverty reductions. That means that China has consistently made an effort to identify who the poor are and what are the reasons for their status of poverty. And based of that, identified precise measures to lift these poor people out of poverty that range for production enhancement, industrialization of rural areas, social welfare, vocational training, and so on and so forth. Fourth, an integrated approach to poverty reduction, which combined investment in infrastructure with social development, investments in health, education, and economic development, meaning investments in production enhancement and industrialization. Has it been effective? Yes. If we think that 40 years ago we had more than 800 million people living in poverty, and now we are about 32 million left.
So given the progress we've already seen, we know that China aims to lift over 10 million people in the rural areas out of poverty within this year, and they have increased funding for that. So how likely is it that China will achieve this year's target?
Well, I personally believe that this target is achievable if we consider that last year in 2017, about 13 million people were brought out of poverty. And over the past year, so in the range 2013-2017, about 70 million people were brought out of poverty. That makes 13 to 14 million people per year. Considering that the closer you get to the targets, the harder it becomes to get the target, I think that 10 million, conservative figures of 10 million is probably achievable.
Now, we know that China's goal of having a moderately prosperous society does require all citizens to be living above the poverty line by 2020. What more do you think the government should be doing to achieve that?
Well, as I said, continuing and implementing the measures, the policies that have been implemented over the past 40 years. So continuing allocating adequate financial resources to poverty reduction, combining interventions in different sectors, social sectors, economic sectors, complemented with infrastructures, and continuing to implement this strong vision of a society, of a country free of poverty.
Now, what about the provinces and regions specifically? Are there any specific ones that you think should be given more attention?
Well, in the past, historically, the areas that were poorest were the central and western provinces. Nowadays, this is only partially true. Nowadays, we're talking about pockets of poverty in provinces. And these are namely the remote and mountainous areas in central and western China. This is because these are the most remote areas with difficult physical access, limited development opportunities, and include people that are still lagging behind, eldest, sick people, handicapped people.
And very quickly, what are some of the challenges that still remain in implementing these poverty alleviation goals?
Well, as I said earlier, the closer you get to the targets, the harder it becomes. The marginal efforts, the marginal cost to bring out of poverty the remaining poor is high. And this is precisely because the poor are more spread out. They live in remote areas. They have limited opportunities for development. So the closer you get to the 0 point, the harder it is to get them out of poverty.
All right, thank you so much. Matteo Marchisio there, Country Director and IFAD Representative for China and Mongolia.